Welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. My guest today is Angela Hewitt, one of the world's leading concert pianists and foremost interpreters of Bach. The New York Times said that she's one of those rare performers who seems to get something in their heads and hearts and find it at their fingertips instantaneously. Angela was a child prodigy taught by her parents who has exceeded her potential. She's had a 40-year career in which she still plays 80 concerts a year. She has her own annual festival in Italy and has made 50 recordings. Angela Hewitt, hello.
Hello, Valerie.
You've been described as one of the busiest pianists on earth. So what drives that relentless schedule?
I love performing. I love playing. I love playing lots of different repertoire. I've done it all my life. And I just love being out there. I love being on stage. I love sharing the music with people, being in different cultures, in different places. But it's that act of sharing something of great beauty that really, and also I like to fill my days. I like to be busy. I've always been that way. And it gives me something to get up for in the morning, you know. So I'm not stopping, I'm going on.
But what is life like? Because I'm thinking rehearsal, repertoire, but the travel, hotels, gowns, hair and makeup.
Yeah.
And then, you know, meals and, you know, all that, and then create magic.
The glamour, as
yes.
we say. And yes, people don't often think of the other side. And if I may say, classical musicians are sort of just expected to get themselves around the world. We don't have limousines coming to the door to pick us up and take us to the airport, very rarely, in some places, yes. But it's not always like that. I can remember trying to get to my debut at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York on a very snowy February day, -20, and you know, they can't deal with snow there like us Canadians can. And I went for rehearsal in the afternoon, and then I couldn't get back to my hotel, which was around by Carnegie Hall. No taxis. I had to get on a bus, and then I had to get on the subway, and then I had to get across to Columbus Circle, and then I had to walk, and I got to my hotel. I was so frozen. I got into a hot bath to thaw out. I made my meal. I got ready. I phoned some friends, said, "Can you take me there?" No, we can't move the car. I got it. So I got my suitcase, I walked over to the subway, and I was in such a panic, I went the wrong way. I got an express train going south instead of north. Anyway, then I finally got up there and I got a taxi for the last 3 blocks and arrived at 3 minutes before the recital and had to scramble into my gown and walked out on stage looking perfectly calm and played in a freezing cold Metropolitan Museum of Art. Yeah. So things like that. That's a particularly good story. But yeah, and the gowns, of course, male pianists, musicians, well, now they're more stylish, but on the whole don't have the problem of, yes, choosing a proper gown and carrying all those around, and the shoes and the jewelry and as you say, the hair and all of that. You have to be very, very self-sufficient, very resourceful. I book all my own travel. Yeah.
And strong.
And
like
strong.
You really have to be, you know,
tough.
an athlete.
Tough. You have to be tough. Tough physically, but also tough mentally and emotionally. Yes.
Sounds great.
Well, I think, you know, there's so many pianists, especially the young generation now. I mean, what my generation perhaps did at age 16, they now do it like 12. You know, it's unbelievable. But it takes much more than just being able to play the notes to make a career as a concert pianist. And you have to have the personality that I think also likes to interact with people, but that you enjoy it and that you can take all of these other things and then still get up and perform.
Tell me about your love of Bach.
Well, I grew up here in Ottawa in a very musical household. My father was organist and choirmaster at the cathedral in Christchurch Cathedral in Ottawa for almost 50 years. He had come from England. He was named assistant at Westminster Abbey in 1931, but decided to come to Canada instead. My mother met him in 1945, and she went to take organ lessons. She was a high school teacher here. They had an organ in the auditorium, and so, and I came along later, but yeah, so I grew up in a house listening to wonderful music, played wonderfully well. They were both beautiful musicians. And they started me off, and of course I heard my father play all the great organ works of Bach, so that was the best introduction I could have. But they were very particular also when I started piano about creating a nice sound, about all the things like phrasing and articulation and making it sound musical. And I sang, and I played the violin, I played the recorder, I did classical ballet from the age of 3 for 20 years, all things that sort of helped not just with my interpretation of Bach, but with all the other composers. So it was a great house to grow up in, and also they understood what it was to be a musician, and they didn't, push me in any horrible way. Although, if I may say one funny story, I had an invitation at the age of 4 because I had just passed my grade 1 Royal Conservatory exam, and it got on the wires, in those days, and it made it down to Hollywood, and we got this letter from the Lawrence Welk show. Would I appear on the Lawrence Welk show in Hollywood? And my parents said no, because they didn't think it was, good for a 4-year-old to have. What parent these days would say no to that, But I have the letter still. We have a tape of me playing all my grade 1 pieces at age 4 and singing, and it's very funny. And my father was a perfectionist, so I had to play it until it was perfect, And at one stage you hear him saying, "Once more, please." And then my mother said, "Godfrey, they're only children." But I learned very on what it was to play something perfectly and to get it right,
And you headed off to the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, studied there mostly. And it was, I read that it wasn't until you were 16 that you were introduced to the Goldberg Variations. It's called, the most serious and ambitious work for keyboard.
Yeah.
So this was something worth waiting for and something very special.
The ripe old age of 16, yeah. It was written, actually, we think, for a harpsichordist, Goldberg, who was studying with Bach, who was like 15, 16 at the time. So there was a competition in Washington in 1975 announced with the Goldberg as a test piece. And I applied. I was only 16 when I applied, and I performed it for the first time here at the Cathedral in Ottawa. But I was 17 by the time the competition came along, and I won a top prize. Second prize was all done behind a curtain. The judges had no idea who was playing, the age, gender, nothing. And a 32-year-old Polish lady won, and I was 0.2 of a point behind. But yeah, so that, and it's the piece that has followed me the most throughout my career and changed and developed with me, which is a wonderful thing. But my teacher gave it to me at that age because he knew I had already done a lot of Bach. Because a lot of kids now can play the Goldberg, but it's the understanding of the style, it's the understanding of what it means to play Bach, of the musical language, and there's much more to it than just playing the notes.
Interesting, and you've talked about this many times, that one of the great famous interpreters of Bach is another Canadian,
yes.
Glenn Gould. I love the story about you seeing him on television and saying, "Who is this kook?" Because he, his nose practically on the keyboard.
When I was a kid, we remembered those black and white programs he did on a Sunday night on CBC TV, and yeah, I'd see this guy, playing like this, and we got his LPs and listened. But I always knew, even from the youngest age, that it was somehow more Glenn Gould than what I had imagined for Bach. But I listened, and it was certainly a level to aspire to and a perfection. But I never set out to imitate him. I had my own ideas.
You talked about taking dance and et cetera as a child. Very influenced by dancing and movement and all the arts coming together.
Yeah, I sing and dance the whole time. I sing along with them to get the phrasing. I conduct them for the rhythm and the breathing. I show them the polonaise, which I dance, with the steps, the mazurka, the waltz. Yeah, all of that thing. I think it's so necessary for any instrumentalist, really, to be able to sing and dance, because that's the essence of music.
What do you think is your greatest talent?
Oh, mamma mia. Well, I would say, and I've learned it, over the years, communicating with my audience and bringing people together. The audience that I have who comes from all over the world, they form friendships, and it's like a family. So I think, I've learned how to do that, but it's a very important part of what I do. Yeah.
You have a remarkable ability to memorize.
Oh, I've worked at it. Yeah, but
what's the longest piece that you've memorized?
Well, the Goldberg, with the repeats is an hour and 20 minutes. But, I've memorized all 32 Beethoven sonatas, which somebody just put in a playlist in Spotify, which is something like 24 hours of music, or I don't know, whatever, or all the complete Bach is even more. It's 12 recitals, which I all memorized the whole stuff. I've just memorized all 18 Mozart sonatas, but pianists and singers, I suppose, because when they do opera, they have to memorize the words of music, but pianists were memorizing not just one line like a violinist would, but all, up to 4 or 5 lines at once. And it was really the fault of Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert Schumann and Liszt, the virtuoso pianist, romantic virtuoso pianist. They started playing from memory because before that nobody did. And they were actually considered very arrogant to play from memory. But then others thought, well, we better too to keep up with them, you see. So pianists have inherited this. Now there's a tendency, because you can use the iPad and turn the pages with a foot pedal, so nobody's having to turn, which is a great invention, and I do use it for chamber music, and when I play something that is incredibly complicated or new, I do use it, but I still try to play from memory as much as possible because it's a muscle. It's something that we need to keep going, and I worry about young kids now. They don't have to memorize because it's all on their phone. They don't have to memorize phone numbers, or they don't memorize poetry like we used to. So I really think that especially in those young years, you've got to develop that. But then when you're older, it becomes a completely different way of memorizing, much more consciously. We know that. But I force myself to do it, and even though it takes me longer, it's in a way it's more secure because I've had to think about it so much more.
Well, I guess when you've got the whole piece in your brain and it's not just pages, you see it.
You play differently. Because you have that arc from beginning to end, it's there inside you. And you have that security, security, because it can always go in a flash.
And it has it, I'm sure it has.
Yeah, on occasion, but... no. I mean, what you must not do is walk out on stage and say, I'm going to go wrong. No, because it's very psychological. So you must go out saying, I'm going to sing every note, I know it, I'm going to concentrate. You're not going to let anybody's coughing disturb you or whatever happened, anybody's phone going off. You can't let that disturb you. So it's concentration, you work at that. But yeah, it's really, I think when you have a piece inside you, like the Goldberg, that can take an hour and 20 minutes to play, it's wonderful to have that freedom then that security, which then gives you the freedom to express everything you want to say.
So you can concentrate, but I was hearing about one time, what was it, a beetle?
Oh. Walking up my bare arm. I was playing in the Château de Chillon in Switzerland on Lake Geneva, and I'm playing a complicated Bach fugue, and this beetle was walking slowly up my arm, and I couldn't move because, it got here, terrible. Anyway, then it flew away once it was up here, but I thought I would die. Yeah, that's just one example.
But that must be the ultimate test.
One
or a fly landing on your nose.
Yeah, or on the keys. They can land on the keys too. Or, yes, many different things can happen.
You feel that music really has a power to heal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I get so many emails, letters, comments from people all throughout the years, really. People who've gone through a bereavement and listening to my recordings helps them. People who listen to a recording and write me and saying, I want that track, that Schumann Widmung at my funeral. people were waiting for a baby to be delivered, and it's not coming, and so they played my Well-Tempered Clavier for several days in the hospital, in the labor room, and then when the baby finally comes, they name it Sebastian after Johann Sebastian Bach. And people who have lost their jobs. I remember one man in Canada who lost his job at CBC and just couldn't listen to music for many, many years, and then heard me on the radio, and that just got him back into it. That was very moving.
And you played a concert on the day of your mother's death.
Oh, I did.
Was that awful or comforting? Or?
I had told the hospital, look, it doesn't make any difference. I knew she was going. I said, I've got this huge recital in London's Royal Festival Hall for 2,300 people in the afternoon. I went to a hotel to get a good sleep, but then they had a substitute doctor who didn't look at the chart and phoned them my number. And so, although I didn't answer the call, I knew what it was, but I still played with the support of friends, and I knew that, well, I thought maybe she wanted to go then so she'd hear the concert. But yeah, and I played at a very close friend's funeral the other day in Italy. Well, you know, music somehow on those occasions helps so much, so I think if we can find the strength inside us to play, it's the best thing to do. You know?
You did that in COVID. You know,
I
set
did
up a camera
I
on your
did.
piano and played. I mean, it was, I'm sure, as much for you as for all the people you felt who needed to hear it.
I was sitting alone at home in my one-bedroom flat in London with just the garden outside at least, but I was one of the first to sort of put my phone just at the end of the keyboard. I didn't show my face. I didn't feel it was the moment to show one's face. Just my hands and the reflection in my Fazioli. And in a different sweater every day, in my pajamas, not otherwise, but and played pieces that amateurs or students could also play, and nothing too complicated, and for 2 minutes and 20 seconds, which was all I could get on Twitter. And it was company for me, because I get comments from people in Vancouver or San Francisco who would wake up to it, and people in New Zealand and Australia going to bed and saying, what's Angela playing for us this morning, tonight, you know. So it was really comfort for me too, company for me.
Oh, it must have been lovely. Kept you going.
It kept me going.
To keep that connection.
It did keep me going, yeah.
You talked about my Fazioli.
Yes.
You have to talk about your piano. I mean, what is that relationship?
I have several Faziolis, I must say. And I love the Fazioli pianos because they're very creative. They have a wide range of sound, really a lot of color, a lot of vibrations, a lot of harmonics there. And also quite an easy piano to play. I don't feel that I'm putting in any energy that I don't need to, you know, on some pianos you have to just physically put in more power. And then, you know, if you're pressing 6 hours a day, you get sore shoulders, sore arms, that's not good. So they say it's like driving a Ferrari. I've never driven a Ferrari, but I can imagine it's a pretty smooth ride. But yeah, so I now have, well, everybody perhaps knows the story of my...
It's a famous story. If they don't know it, tell this story.
Well,
and try not to cry.
No, it was in January 2020, and I was recording a Beethoven CD in a church in Berlin. And we had finished, and I said they could move it and take it back to my house in Italy. And I was in the control room down the hall with my producer, and then they came in and said they dropped the thing, and I
shattered it.
Yeah, and I hadn't been there when it happened. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. I don't have that in my visual memory, but it was a big enough shock. Well, to make a long story short, yes, it was kaput. It was assessed, and so. Mr. Fazioli had 5 new ones, then came lockdown, so I couldn't go anywhere till July. My first trip was to the Fazioli factory near Venice to choose a new one. Of course, but the story went all over the wires, like that was the story in how the media works. I mean, it was unbelievable. I put a little post on Facebook, and boom, within 24 hours it was in the New York Times, Washington Post, People Magazine, USA Today, Die Welt, you know. Was CNN wanted an interview. I said no, I didn't want to, you know. But that was the story and how media works. So then I chose a new one at the end of July, and the story has a happy ending, you know. And I have a wonderful new one that now sits in my house in Italy, in which travels for recordings only. Not, you know, I would be broke if it went around the world with me. But I have another one too here in Ottawa that I play when I perform here at the National Arts Centre or in other places nearby.
but it's just a simpatico, just
It's
a
my,
connection.
yeah, it's my best friend, and it's just wonderful, as I did the other night at the National Arts Center, to get up and play an instrument that's my own and to feel at one with it and to know that it's going to respond. And yeah, it makes, you know, violinists can go all over the world with their piano, with their violin. For pianists, it's much harder because of the instrument, but still, when I'm able to play it, and for recordings I make sure I have my own, then it's a great feeling.
Tell me about Trasimeno.
My music festival in Umbria, yeah, and well, I never expected to have a house or anything in Italy, but in 2002 I purchased a piece of land sort of on a whim. My agent at the time was fixing up a property in Umbria, and I bought a piece of land with planning permission in place for a house. But again, to make a very long but happy story short, I built a house, or people built a house for me in Umbria on the fourth largest lake in Italy, Lake Trasimeno, between Florence and Rome. Built a house for me in 14 months, and then I saw this incredible castle, the Castle of the Knights of Malta, around the hill, 15th century courtyard with the most stunning acoustic. I walked in there and I thought, wow, okay, I have to do a festival here because, you know, and it's 5 minutes from my house. So I started the festival in 2005, and that's grown. We use many more venues now, beautiful churches and oratorios and palazzi and Perugia and Assisi and different places, and people come from all around the world. So now in 2024, we're in our 19th year. But yeah, I never expect to have a home in Italy, but it's really opened up my life. And you know, when you're in Italy, you feel a bit different person. You can talk with your hands, and you become more expressive, and you become more enthusiastic about food and life in general. So I'm very happy to have had and have that in my life.
Do you worry that classical music is dying? You know, people aren't going to church. You know, it just isn't exposed. This younger generation is.
It's different. I mean, you hinted there that yes, people don't go to church anymore, which is where many people of my generation were introduced to music. You know, that was where they sang in choirs, and that's gone really, more or less. So, but I think we just have to go about it in a different way, and we have to educate the young. Of course, we have to put instruments in their hands. That's why I'm an ambassador for the orchestra project here in Ottawa, which is a bit based on the El Sistema project. But you know, giving kids, especially disadvantaged kids, free music lessons, giving them instruments, making them play, having them play in an orchestra, sing in a choir. It's a wonderful initiative. And it's not to go on to be professional musicians, although some will, but it's to give them a feeling of community, of doing something with other kids that makes them happy. It's a home away from home because many come from abusive homes. So it's really, and it develops their skills for other things in life. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about music, and what so many politicians don't see. You know, it's the first thing that goes in any budget. It's sort of the arts, but it's our basic life force to create.
And universal language.
And universal language. I can go and play in any country in the world, and I do, you know, represent my country too, also. So it's a very. I've always been very strong about that governments really need to see the arts as an ambassador and as identifying their country.
Well, in a way, you build your brain and fill your soul.
Memory and discipline and all the things that we've already talked about. But yes, soul. And just an appreciation of beauty. Beauty as a concept. Beauty in life. You know, recognizing beauty, striving for beauty, expressing beauty. You know, that's something which sometimes gets a bit lost now.
What does being Canadian mean to you?
It's a great thing to be Canadian. I think we're extremely lucky, and we forget that sometimes. I mean, I don't forget it, but I think many people do. When I mention around the world to taxi drivers, to builders, you know, in my house in London, they come in from Poland and from Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary and Brazil, and I say, I'm Canadian. They go, oh, what are you doing here? They said, why aren't you in Canada? You know, I said, well, I'm still there a lot. But Canada, from them, has this image of, you know, a wonderful free enterprising country, and I really hope we can keep that because, and also as a pianist, I'm very happy to be not, I mean, my teacher was French, and so if anything, my playing is more of the French school. But you know, there's the Russian school, there's the American school, quite easily identifiable. There's no Canadian school of piano playing except for, you know, Glenn Gould, and we have wonderful pianists in Canada, wonderful. But we each have our own style, and that's a great thing, I think. So it gives you a freedom. It gives you a freedom to be Canadian. And I love that. You know, you can strive for excellence, but you can't be put in a box that sort of is like a straitjacket. So, although I have 3 passports now, I have also British through my father and an Irish through my grandmother, which is very handy for touring around. The Canadian, of course, is still the most important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valerie.
Lovely to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of Richard Wernham and Julia West, as well as the following donors: Ted and Alice Kernahan, Tony and Sherry Fell, Mary Davey, the Browning Watt Foundation, David and Cheryl Carr, Bryce and Nikki Douglas, Richard Pilosoff, Earl and Janice Oborn, the Linwood Family Foundation, Steve and Catherine Coxford, Michael McCain and family, Clench House Foundation, the 63 Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.